This video is sponsored by Ground News. More on them in just a bit.
I make a lot of critical content about left-wing creators and arguments characteristically associated with the left. Not because I disagree with the underlying values in the form of analysis used to add validity to left-wing perspectives, but because I frequently disagree with the online left's application strategies and the inconsistent moral and political philosophies that often arise in that space. When I talk about creators whose channels are not inherently left-wing, as in they do not actually create political content or content that utilizes political analysis, I sometimes use the descriptor of left-leaning, like left-leaning commentary. A great example of this would be when I discussed Nick from the channel Nick is Not Green or Green is Not Nick, and now He Said Us, and his connection to the super mega controversy a year or so ago. It's a habit I've been trying to get out of because I've begun to question why I see some content, some humorous commentary content, as very indicative of the left. I'm aware this is a practice that many other creators and audience members engage in and really don't even question, because humans are great with pattern recognition. With enough exposure, we can immediately see and understand the commonalities between content and creators. Our ears can almost automatically detect when a creator is more than likely more progressive just based on the topics they choose to delve into, the way they speak about certain groups of people, the language they use. But we're not always right. There has been a growing divide in the political realm for the last decade or so, and I believe it is very much tied to the increased popularization of leftist thought, the stagnancy and political confusion within the Democratic Party, and the alt-right's continuous partnership and emergence with the religious right. The political fabric of this nation looks very much like a size small spandex t-shirt pulled over double D titties. The tension isn't new or even unfamiliar, but it is being more recognized and feels more potent due to the incrementally progressive policies in the United States being threatened. Leftists have been incredibly distinct from Democrats, but the separatism of liberal from leftist within the states, that is still being understood, although leftism largely exists to directly oppose liberalism due to the capitalistic aspirations of it. Because of the turmoil within US politics, due to the US government's continuous involvement in dangerous, exploitative, apathetic, and genocidal matters, as well as the results of the recent election, I began questioning more and more how I would even begin to describe a present-day leftist to someone. This probably sounds ridiculous to so many of you, simply because we've been existing in this online realm for the last 11 or 12 years, where the most popular social media platforms seem to skew more progressive. Progressive here is just meaning in the way of social progress. A lot of us exist within certain niches of content that frequently speak to our own interests and opinions. Those niches subsequently build our perspective on the realms we frequently reside in. So we may not vocalize what a leftist is, but we know intuitively what one is. However, with the dynamics of the presidential election and impending policy changes, the ongoing tragic happenings around the world, and as the general online left continues to build an image and concept of itself, I think it's becoming increasingly more important to be able to distinguish a leftist as easily as we can a Democrat, a Republican, or a Trumper. Not because I particularly think the online left is exceptionally bad nor good at the moment. I know some people would disagree with that because of the misadventures of a few, but normally I find that the bad deeds of vocally left creators are really blown out of proportion. I'm specifically thinking of the In Praise and Shadows x Wendigo fiasco from earlier this year. There were a lot of points in Praise of Shadows, or Zane's bad conservative horror movies piece, like repeating the false allegations originally pushed by Sneeko against the creator Brandon Buckingham,
a gun YouTuber who has been accused of threatening rape,
or by relying on the associations of Wendigoon to demoralize his character rather than building arguments based on his alleged harmful conservativity based on his own words and content.
Wendigoon is very publicly friends with Turkey Tom. Wendigoon is publicly friends with Donut Operator. He is publicly friends with Shoe on Head. He is friends with Oompaville,
as well as his other very superficial dissections, which is ironic given his typical content style. But I've seen people do much worse online who continue to double down on their bad behavior. And that particular spear on YouTube that really likes to pick at and belittle leftist creators to the point of submission can be very obsessive, but also very selective about who, how, or why they go after someone. So I'm very much not in the camp of people who believe leftist content is a plague, but I do think it's so expansive, almost over expansive. It's to the point where if you're not chronically integrated into the sphere, then you don't really know who or what the concept of a leftist even is. And contrary to what many people may believe, that's not a good thing. You want people to be able to recognize you and see you as you are without the necessitation of watching hours of content from multiple creators and diving into decades upon decades of literature on your political stances and affairs. That doesn't have to equate to the removal of nuance from the leftist perspective, but it is a condensing of it into a package where people can effortlessly review and understand it. After all, Americans tend not to be super politically engaged, but according to a survey from this past June, they still know where issue stances typically lean when it comes to the two major parties. Like, they know Republicans tend to support stricter immigration laws, while Democrats typically advocate for subsidized healthcare and gun control. As we move forward as a nation under another Trump presidency, where he has all but promised to rip the fabric of this very nation apart based on his thinly veiled, if at all veiled, Christo-fascist rhetoric, it is more important than ever for the left and anyone adjacent, which does include myself, to organize, prepare, and educate. Not in the realm of fear-mongering, but in reality where we are very much going to face the consequences of having a majority conservative House, Senate, and Supreme Court, as two judges are set to retire within Trump's term. And all of these majorities fall under their crown prince, whom they serve because he is their billionaire messiah. I've said on this channel before that movement and change requires resilience, and that doesn't change when you feel forsaken by those you call your allies, or because you suffered a short-term but nonetheless brutal loss. I will be making a video that is scheduled to post not too long after this one, specifically about the reactions of the online left and those adjacent to the election, because there's a lot to say and a lot to unpack there. A lot of unhinged responses to address and dissect. But for now, in this video, I want to explore some of the strengths and weaknesses of the online left, particularly as it pertains to the United States, because in the United States, the online realm is the only realm where the left has any sense of sway. The primary question being asked here is, why can outsiders not easily identify a leftist? And even if they could, would they even care to support the schismatic group? For this essay, I've identified 3 key characteristics I want to focus on: analysis structure, policy, and group behavior and reputation. This will in no way be an objective analysis, because a political analysis is structurally defined by its ability to add meaning and insight to factual occurrences. This video has a very particular intention and was written from a very specific perspective, so bias should be expected. However, if you're searching for unbiased information to assist you in your self-learning endeavors, then you may want to check out today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is an amazing online subscription-based platform that gathers related articles from around the world into one place so you can get a clear outlook on how different outlets cover the exact same story. As we move into 2025, it is very essential for all of us to be aware of the political bias that exists within articles. Even though the base level information of them can be semi-correct, the political spin and journalistic integrity can greatly vary depending on where the author's biases lie. A topic as simple as who won the Senate majority can be laced with so much deception. Ground News helps us out by identifying and showing us what political leanings are reporting on a subject the most, and the percentage of factuality within those articles. One of my favorite features, aside from the easy readability of the platform itself, is the bias comparison snapshot tool. Here we can see the left generally emphasizes the broader implications for legislative agendas, while the center narrows in on the split itself without the additional speculation on the legislative implications. This personally saves me a ton of time because I do intentionally consume media from multiple perspectives so I can figure out what's missing and why. Ground News streamlines that process for me. and they can do it for you as well. So if you want to skip the clickbait, the sensationalism, the politicized narratives, you should either scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or use my link down below, groundnews/unpoetic, to get 50% off their Vantage subscription plan, which is by far one of their best sales of the year, and it's only going to be available for a very limited time. Thank you very much to Ground News for ensuring articles and news remains transparent even when they don't want them to. And thank you all so much for checking them out. The political left is something that is still growing in prominence offline in the US. While there's been overt iterations of leftist movements and parties in this very large but very isolated country, none of them have really stuck or garnered long-term substantial power. The lack of longevity of these parties or groups is an issue, but it's also an understandable one due to the structures of the country. We are very capitalistic in not only economic stances, but in cultural frames of reference and in politics. Even if there were not copious amounts of anti-socialist, anti-communist, anti-progressive propaganda constantly permeating the nation, I still don't believe a considerable number of Americans would naturally shift left. But I'm not really interested in the offline in this moment, because a remarkable component about the online left is its relevance to cultural dynamics and its relationship to education. In other words, the online left has been successfully building an identity for itself and influencing people via interpersonal impact. Additionally, because on platforms like YouTube and TikTok, two of the most widely used social media platforms in the American world, things that are associated with leftist or progressive thought are seemingly disproportionately shown. It lends to the assumption that many or most younger generations are very radicalized. It's why leftist video essayists like T. Noir or Cheyenne Lynn are so interesting. By infusing political and sociocultural analysis structures with pop culture phenomenon or current events, they are effectively influencing their audience's thought processes. Rather than simply feeding people an opinion on a particular topic, similar to mainstream media outlets, a good video essayist ushers you through their cognitive strategies, which leads to the audience adopting not only the evaluations, but the modes of analysis. That old phrase of, "it's not what you think, it's how you think," is in full effect here. It is much more beneficial to influence people to think like you, rather than for them to simply adopt the same opinions as you. Because ideally, they'll apply that way of thinking to other topics. This manner of influencing audiences is one of the stepping stones of forming true political distinctions, even though in this case is a bit unorthodox because it only exists within an online realm. Showing your work or how you arrive to a certain political stance or prescription is very important. By doing this, it helps prevent the creation of senseless, ignorant mouthpieces who are simply prone to indoctrination. That's why I often refer to left-leaning video essays as leftist scripts, because I understand how someone online in the leftist sphere would typically analyze a particular situation. When it comes to the misdeeds of a person from a marginalized identity, they will usually humanize the group beforehand, intentionally severitize the person's wrongdoings from the person's identity to ensure there's no inherent link established in the audience's minds, and then analyze the issue from multiple perspectives, but also connect it back to a larger scale societal trend because everything is said to have ties to grander socio-political institutions. This is a very typical left deconstruction of an issue, understanding how the individual connects to the whole. This is distinctively different from how, say, Mudahar from the channel Some Ordinary Gamers would approach the same subject. If we were to look at his investigation on the fallen streamer Keffals, we could point to how he approached the topic of the distribution of back alley hormonal replacement therapy drugs, or HRT, or recipes on how to make them to potential minors.
It's finally time to talk about do-it-yourself hormones. In June of 2022, Claire began sponsoring the DIY HRT directory. For a myriad of reasons, hormone replacement therapy is often inaccessible to many trans people. The directory intends to teach people how to, quote-unquote, safely obtain HRT without a prescription. While some are legitimate pharmaceutical-grade medications simply imported from other countries, the site also offers a number of homebrew sources. It's already questionable to endorse what are effectively unregulated drugs. It's even worse to explicitly advocate for their use by minors. Maybe it would be less of an issue if everyone involved in the situation was a legal adult. They are not.
He provided no nuance on the subject itself, simply condemned it.
I have no opposition to providing safe access to HRT for trans people who need them. But it is dangerous to condone questionable individuals with shady histories like Keffals and deceitful messaging to illicitly offer these treatments online, especially to minors.
But it really didn't seem like the condemnation came with care to the community's ongoing plights with law and policy, or the acknowledgement of people's tendencies to undermine and disregard the significance of a medicinal transition to a minor. I had no expectations for Mutahar to discuss this issue from the type of angle that would aid people in understanding that while the website in question may very much be exploiting a vulnerable group for profit, trans people, both adults and minors, are not just idiots randomly purchasing illicit substances online. When it comes to minority groups, especially one as hypervisible yet inexplicably demonized as the trans population, it can be very important to explicitly call out underlying factors because people are already working with biases, and information like this tends to push them further one way or the other. Again, this isn't a form of consideration or examination I'd expect from Mutahar. His video was meant to be little more than a standard hit piece, but I would expect it from a leftist channel analyzing his video because of their archetypal analysis structure. The prominence of the online left doesn't necessarily only and solely come from good and bad video essays on YouTube. It can come from lighthearted commentary channels that briefly mention or pass over something connected to general leftist belief. It comes from shallow TikTok videos that end up trending and covertly encourages other people to simply regurgitate whatever they've previously heard. TikTok politics is truly the bane of left-wing politics, in my opinion. The intoxication of potential virality seems to cloud people's judgment very quickly. When I refer to lighthearted commentary, I'm not referring to the Jarvis Johnsons or Danny Gonzalez. While I do believe both creators are more than likely progressive, their content is generally and pointedly apolitical. The flex of left-leaning people often see in channels of this caliber is that they simply just don't hate other people and are supportive of multiple communities. But socially progressive and politically progressive or left-wing are two very different things. And like I said, I don't think it's valuable to even speculate on. For lighthearted commentary, I'm actually more so thinking of Tiffany Ferg, Mika's Frederick. Yes, a Canadian woman stuck in there, I know. All of these creators are more than likely either progressive or left-wing. I actually know that they are, but their content is not always 100% politically overt. However, the way they tend to construct their analysis of drama cycles, media, or other topics mirror the deconstruction patterns of more overtly left channels. It is a very fine line, but these creators and creators like them are what help the online left speed run their relevance. The audience capture of these channels may intersect with explicit left tube creators, but what their audiences actually are, rather than leftists, are people who just enjoy thoughtful, socially progressive content. Politically, that could mean centrists, moderate, or apolitical people. While people are engaging with this type of content, they are subconsciously accepting, not necessarily agreeing with, but accepting the manners in which these creators analyze non-political situations. And if I know my audience well enough, I'd probably say that some of you are thinking I'm trying to set up a pipeline theory where commentary channels will eventually lead people to unconcealed political content. But I'm not. Pipelines typically require a specific large entry point that captures the widest breadth of people possible. And that is where I diverge, because I generally believe when it comes to chosen content, meaning content that actively requires a person to click on it in order to watch it and to continue watching it, the underlying messaging of the video must already align with the person's implicit biases. For example, if you are someone who does not give much respect or consideration to potential sexual assault survivors, I wouldn't expect for you to make it past the first 2 minutes of my Super Mega video from last year. The bias against online claims of sexual assault allegations was already there, and therefore most people will not even begin to engage, and if they do, they will more than likely engage in a censorious deconstruction, finding any points of weakness to exploit for the purposes of reaffirming their own biases. This is a commonplace. If I were to watch a Matt Walsh video, there is no way in hell I'm going to hear him out because of the bias of my principles, of which diametrically oppose his. The viewer must have a neutral or malformed bias in order for a pipeline theory to take effect on YouTube, in my opinion. Earlier, I called TikTok politics the bane of the left's existence. And while this is partially because of the desire of virality, underneath that is the issue of trends dictating the app and the niches on it. The standard definition of an online trend is something along the lines of a topic, event, or idea gaining popularity for a period of time. And I want to emphasize the phrase, a period of time. Trends are temporary, and on TikTok, when it comes to political topics, they are born out of emotional turmoil and quick reactions. Due to TikTok and similar platforms, the term micro-trend was born to specifically describe the rapidness of the life cycle of a fad that was popularized online. You can reference the Stanley Cup craze, where the company went from $70 million in sales to $750 million within 1 year's time span. That is an unheard of spike, fully driven by the toxic consumerist tribalism people engage in on TikTok. Imagine what that does to politics. If people are so quick to overconsume, to go out and physically spend their own money that they don't have, based on a few influencers raving about a subpar product, imagine what is happening to their already prone minds when they are constantly inundated by pushed content centering on politics. Push content differs from chosen content in that the user is not making an active decision to see certain videos. If we can accept the prevalent leftist theory that individuals are undoubtedly affected and influenced by abstract concepts into developing and maintaining certain biases, we should also be able to accept the assumption that people are just as influenced by what seems to be popular thoughts and opinions due to an intelligent algorithm identifying the commonalities between the videos you linger on the most. Again, this is not a pipeline theory. It's more so a conformity bias that acts out of the distortion of the reality the app can sometimes cause to chronically online people. TikTok's algorithm is part of the reason why people assume leftist sentiment is so pervasive in the United States. I intentionally distinguish the platform as having pushed content because it does not only work to give you content you want to see based on your preferences and watch times, it also tends to show you content that you don't want to see, things that will enrage you, because rage often elicits engagement. Once the algorithm has figured out that sweet spot for you, that thing that pisses you off but not too much to where you block or report the content, but just enough to where you feel the need to comment about your disagreement, it'll keep throwing that content at you every now and then. I think YouTube tends to be quite different from TikTok in its algorithmic suggestions because the platform seems to only work off the user's preferences, at least for the most part. The only way I personally see right-wing content on YouTube is when I actively south it out. So when moderates, conservatives, or Trump and his supporters are constantly pushing the idea that the left is an infection, despite the political left being a hyper minority within the political realm here, the reality of the left's lack of power doesn't particularly matter because the voters that swung over to Trump, Gen Z men primarily, think the left is much, much bigger than what it truly is. And they don't seem to have positive opinions of it, or rather they have no strong opinions for it. The illusion that the left, radical or otherwise, is bigger than what it is seems to add to the assumption that Gen Z is more progressive than what they truly are. Statistically, younger people are generally more progressive, no matter the time period. I mean, the baby boomers were the generation to create the hippie or beatnik movement. Historically, as people age, they skew more conservative, especially in the realm of economics, because classically, with age comes a stake in the economy via home purchases and investments. However, millennials stand out from this trend. Maybe it's because the generation has widely been unable to achieve the same level of success as prior generations, but millennials still lean more consistently progressive than any other age demographic. Gen Z, however, has been called the most progressive generation to date, which is probably very true. But we possibly called it a bit too early when it comes to the actual political realm, rather than just with social issues because they are also still very young, very susceptible, and very chronically online. Younger people are more likely to care for and follow the opinions and recommendations of their communities, as in the people they are actually around. With this relevant fact, mixed with parasociality, a presidential candidate they were not excited about, and the glaring uncertainty of their economic futures, all probably culminated into a shift right. Just like when people assume Taylor Swift may be able to sway the votes of white women, we can probably assume the interviews and endorsements by the likes of Joe Rogan and Jake Paul aided in swaying some white men. Because most of that shift is accounted for by white young men, the question of racism and sexism can come into play here, because there are very many who truly believe a woman cannot effectively lead a nation, let alone a woman of color. Whether or not this is the case is truly irrelevant to me, because at the end of the day, even with the prior reasonings given, it is very clear Gen Z is not as progressive or socially cautious as we previously assumed. And they would never admit that it's because she's black or Indian or a she. So it's rather a moot point to argue. According to the Associated Press, the primary issue for the election this year was the economy, which makes sense. Most working class and middle class Americans have been financially suffering or stagnated for the last several years. However, there were other things and other communities at stake, but people's economic comforts were elevated in their decision-making processes, or at least so they say. Acknowledging this would simultaneously necessitate our understanding that a good portion of Gen Z voters elevated economics over the safety of marginalized communities, which seems to be against popular leftist sentiment, thereby increasing the believability of the theory that Gen Z is either more moderate or fickler than originally anticipated. How this relates to carving out the left wing's online identity is the need to end the assumption that Gen Z is irrevocably progressive and will therefore be open to leftist postulations. There needs to be a reinvigoration of thorough explanation and more examples given on positive economic changes for both the individual and the nation. The question of economic change is never going to go away, and the pure madness of what the generalized online left actually thinks is good change would be baffling to outsiders, to say the least. Simply saying socialism good will never be enough. Before we move on, I would be remiss to not acknowledge that I don't believe that a lot of people, particularly die-hard Trump supporters and conservatives, actually care that much about the economy. It seems like they use the economy as an excuse, especially when it's working class people. Trump's promise of ending taxation on overtime and on tips genuinely sounds awesome.
I'm also announcing that as part of our additional tax cuts, we will end all taxes on overtime.
But how much is that really going to help you? It probably sounds amazing to especially blue-collar workers, which largely comprises of white and Latino men, but overall, their lives are really not going to change as much as they seem to believe, because the jobs are too low wage to provide the support needed for a family, most of which these men have. And their rent is too high, which is statistically where most of their monthly earnings are going. But that doesn't matter because Trump gave the vibe of giving a damn. And that was enough. To continue with the online left's analysis structure, I think it's worth noting that politics loves slogans. Something short, witty, and snappy, but most importantly, something that embodies the person, movement, or party's spoken and implied intent. Make America Great Again is perfection for the Trump campaign. It effectively gets his point across. He cares about America and the American working class issues just as much as his following does. He sees where the country has failed them and he wants to return them to their former glory, thereby returning America to its former glory, and subliminally letting people know who needs to be removed, silenced, or subjugated in order to achieve this goal. When it comes to the online left, there are several phrases and slogans often associated with it. Black Lives Matter, Stop Transgenocide, From the River to the Sea. Each of these phrases hold a wealth of meaning and intent, but they also cause a bit of confusion, which actually isn't necessarily a horrible thing. A good turn of phrase can be effective in two primary ways. They can be obvious in meaning, or they can be confounding. Confoundment often leads to curiosity, and curiosity can lead to southing additional information. And that's where I think the online left frequently hits a roadblock. The information is rarely there, and when it is there, it lacks cohesion and insightfulness when people are asking, all right, but how? How do we do this? During the boom of pro-Palestinian sentiment on TikTok, you would frequently see online leftists saying from the river to the sea in their videos. This was something that was carried over to real-life protests. However, it quickly became apparent that many people using this phrase had no true idea what it meant, which showed a lack of true solidarity with the Palestinians.
Have you guys chanted from the river to the sea?
Yes.
Okay, which river, which sea?
The sea of...
So you don't know that? No. And the answer was the Mediterranean and the Jordan.
Just notice the signs that you got from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What does that mean?
Well, it's quite self-explanatory. It needs to be...
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, isn't it? Because I guess what I mean is, how would that come about? What would happen to the Israelis, etc.?
I don't.
I'm trying to think of how to word it. Isn't it just as self-explanatory as the area of land? It's Palestine's land.
Yeah. So when you say Palestine, which bit do you mean?
Yeah, the Gaza Strip.
So the Gaza Strip?
The West Bank.
West Bank?
Yeah.
That's it?
I don't know.
How can you effectively advocate for a cause you know nothing about? American allyship when it came to this cause was and is very important and significant. The US has traditionally been bred to be unequivocally pro-Israel and has predisposed its citizens to regarding Israelis as the rightful and only owners of the land they are currently occupying. The unabashed shift from this or silence to the vocal support of Palestine is quite substantial. However, it will not remain as such unless those who proudly claim allyship continue to develop their own understandings more than just for the purposes of support, but also for the edification of others. The point of allyship in general is not to simply not be a jerk to another group of people, but to argue and conversate on their behalf when they are not in the room, especially amongst younger demographics who are, again, more likely to change their minds based on the opinion of someone within their own community. It would be ludicrous to set a standard of having a detailed, extensive knowledge of the histories and ongoings between Palestine and Israel. Most Americans don't even know their own history and do not critically engage with presidential candidates. However, if you are one of those people condemning and canceling others for not posting a watermelon or the flag of Palestine in their bios, then I would expect for you to at least understand what the phrase given to you by Palestinians and Palestinian Americans means.
I'm the only Palestinian American serving in Congress, Mr. Chair, and my perspective is needed here now more than ever. Trying to bully or censor me won't work because this movement for a ceasefire is much bigger than one person. It's growing every single day. There are millions of people across our country who oppose Netanyahu's extremism and are done watching our government support collective punishment and the use of white phosphorus bombs that melt flesh to the bone. Like me, Mr. Chair, they don't believe the answer to war crimes is more war crimes. My criticism has always been of the Israeli government and Netanyahu's actions. It is important to separate people and governments, Mr. Chair. No government is beyond criticism. I can't believe I have to say this, but Palestinian people are not disposable. My grandmother, like all Palestinians, just wants to live her life with freedom and human dignity we all deserve. Speaking up to save lives, Mr. Chair, no matter faith, no matter ethnicity, should not be controversial in this chamber.
The left, online or not, is a faction that already holds all of the burden of proof in the US due to the ideals being considered radical. So if a leftist cannot articulate themselves on an important controversial issue, it serves as a reflection of weakness on the movement itself. Because if you can't even begin to explain it, why should anyone else care? Especially when the person in question is not one of those being impacted. And don't even think about screaming, there are people dying and starving, justice. Why should I have to explain why people should care? Palestinians, Muslims, Middle Eastern people are already a dehumanized group in the States. But more than that, when have Americans ever deeply cared about the cruelty their nation both causes and encourages? While some online leftists constantly use Palestine as a sticking point as to why they didn't vote out of protest against the Democrats, I rarely see or hear anything about Lebanon, the Congo, Sudan, Taiwan, the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, or the liberation movement in Hong Kong. The lists can really go on, unfortunately. Hell, I don't even hear outcries about climate change anymore. These are all things the United States has its hand in or has a stake in. And yet, these issues didn't stop you guys from voting before. The online left tends to pick and choose what to care about and when to use a particular event as retaliation or for protests. At this point, it's a pattern of behavior, and it can indicate a few different things. Selective care, unpacked prejudice, a lack of social pressure because they were told to care by trends, lack of awareness, or the left online is learning how to scale. Scaling issues essentially means prioritizing one issue or at least the coverage of it above another. The reasons of why something is scaled more than something else can vary from person to person. We know the Republicans scale the economy and lie to the working class about them being the most important part of it. We probably want to start understanding how the left as a political entity is scaling as well. And the only way to do that is to broach conversation. Every political party, every political movement around the world, past or present, has practiced scaling because it is simply a must. When people become over encumbered, push too much information or too many different causes, they tend to render themselves apolitical because they don't know how to pick and choose, so they rather not engage at all. Similar to the associated slogans, the protests pushed by the online left should be more tight-lined and pungent. A few months ago, I made a video in part about the Blockout 2024 trend that kicked off in the early summer months and is now effectively dead, like I called it. Blockout 2024 was some people's responses to celebrities and influencers not speaking out about Palestine and not pushing humanitarian aid projects for them. The idea was to block any person of any significant influence who did not meet that particular requirement. However, the requirement was very loosey-goosey. The block lists were untargeted and even unfounded at times. And many people, like myself, didn't really understand the point in the action at all. But my true beef with Blockout 2024 was that it was simply another trend, a very obviously insincere trend. As I predicted, people were able to build platforms off the backs of that trend, not because they had anything particularly insightful to say, but because they stirred up drama and falsified their resoluteness. And most disappointingly, drowned out the voices of those who actually cared and have been showing their care prior to the trend taking off. We can ignore the online left's mobbish tendencies, particularly on TikTok and Twitter, for just a moment. We can ignore that and just focus on the most disheartening facts here. These actions, or rather inactions, make the left look fickle, petty, and short-sighted. And these people turn around and wonder why nobody takes them seriously. The rapid spread of the people's voice on TikTok, I believe, can truly be game-changing if utilized effectively to pass on simple baseline information, to amplify donation efforts, and to build local community. I don't understand why it is constantly used in this other way. The skew towards vengeance, or whatever Blockout 2024 was, it discentered Palestinians because it made people focus on arguing with each other about who to cancel and who to not cancel. Fantastic. I will go into this issue more so in my next video when I talk about people's stances on single issue voting, but the vitriolic nature of some of these online centric trends and wannabe movements will forever mark people's perceptions on the cause partakers are allegedly advocating for. It's not the advocates and the online activists that will suffer from the inappropriate representation of a trend that really and truly begins and ends with them. It's the people they claim to advocate for. In this case, that would be the Palestinians. Make no mistake, I'm not assigning blame to Blackout 2024 as to why the effort towards Palestine seems to have decreased or slowed down, specifically on TikTok. There's quite a few other reasons for that, none of them good, reasonable, or justifiable, but again, tune in for the next video for more on that. However, even in cases of great concern, people can experience burnout very quickly when a call to action starts to shift, bend, and turn in every which way. I frequently feel like the online left gets away with a lot of stuff within its own spaces because of good intentions. Good intentions, or the mention in passé of good intentions, isn't enough. When is the last time you heard an online American leftist talk about policy in any substantial manner? When I say policy, I mean specific ideas, practical ideas on how to move this country forward. I'm not meaning generalizations of socialism, of free healthcare, or universal basic income. Those are ideals. I'm talking about specific steps to get to a better society now. The online left isn't alone in this, trust me. As we have just seen, American presidential elections are about personality, entertainment value, and loyalty to whatever persona the supporter has projected onto the candidate in question. However, the Democrats and Republicans have decades upon decades of historic precedent of recognizable party attributes to fall back on. Both parties tend to campaign on populism, and Trump, god damn it, is incredibly effective in it, according to tens of millions of Americans. As I said before, the general left is saddled with the burden of proof, and on top of that, the left will probably never be able to run solely based on populism in our lifetimes in the States unless something catastrophic occurs. Because of this, I believe the online left should work to sell itself by creating strong exemplars of policy. This is a widely unknown variable when it comes to the States. We can assume what leftists think about something, but how do they believe the issue should actually be addressed? What parameters should be in place to decrease the income gap? Are rental caps the true long-term answer to the increasingly expensive housing market? Or should we be looking at stricter parameters to govern landlords by, meaning that they are regulated to provide proof of renovations of amenities to justify rent increases? In what manner should gun control and crime increases be addressed? What about homelessness and housing loss prevention? If early education and higher education are both indicative factors to someone's potential of achieving success, should we offer free pre-K programs across the nation, or should that be a state-level decision? And if so, why? There's a wealth of knowledgeable left-wing people who have these answers and suggestions, but those people typically reside behind the scenes or in academia. They are not who we, the people, frequently see unless we're looking for them. If you are someone who claims to want change and are willing to work for it, then it is partially your responsibility to your cause to pass along the information in a digestible, meaningful way. The online left has way too many gray areas. The only thing that most people know is the left stands for human rights and marginalized people groups. And that's great. But in reality, that's not what people are looking for. And when I say people, I'm really talking about everyone. The one thing that binds Americans together is the care for individual prosperity through monetary means, as we can see from the election results. While it is understandable as to why the left online would not want to engage in American politics in a way that is synonymous with the status quo, because the core beliefs of the left wing are foundationally incompatible. However, operating within the reality we currently reside in, rather than in the ideal we want, requires compromises to be made. Now, cynically, I have a difficult time believing online leftists do not largely take part in actual policy and governmental progression because of the inability to compromise on their beliefs, but because it sounds so much better to only discuss and drive awareness. I suspect the inaction comes from the lack of cohesion and organization, or maybe the online left in the States is just too unstable and too uncertain to move forward. When there is no widespread knowledge of how very popular American concerns like housing and rental markets, workers' rights, immigration, education, and family support, it can be presumed that no answer culture is the equivalent to status quo. The left online greatly oversimplifies highly complex issues and utilize tactics of belittlement and half-truths to squelch both valid and invalid concerns at times, which is odd because the online left in certain corners is very capable of directly responding to at least invalid concerns with their own responses. I want to use the reaction and subsequent decline in good argumentation in opposition of the repeal of Roe v. Wade as an example here, only because it's one of the issues that are overwhelmingly disavowed by the American people. Currently, over 60% of Americans disagree with the case's overturn, and the numbers for those who support it keep declining. In this specific case, the online left really wouldn't have to work too hard for people to become more angry, more radical when it comes to this fight. Originally, I firmly believed this would be an issue that people would ride for into the very end because white women could center themselves very easily. When it comes to the behavior of white women as a collective, that is a common practice. Argue with your mama on that. However, since the overturn, 22 states and counting have either damn near banned abortions or severely limited it. I'm not blaming the online left or the left in general for this. What I am floored by is that we didn't see many within the online left continuously pushing for people to become more locally involved on both state and city levels during this past bid. Fuck the presidential election for a moment. To the lefties who did not vote, did you vote in the general elections at all? You know, the ones for your state legislators, potentially state governors, general assembly, attorney general, state treasurer, sometimes county officials, judges. You know, all of those essential but unsexy officials that feed into the whole. Did we consider the ballot measures? I'm just asking. Based on current polls, non-voters were not the downfall of the presidential election, but I wonder how that impacted other stuff, like the potential of getting other officials in office who could be there fighting for Roe v. Wade to make a comeback, or at least push the individual state to restore the right of choice. A great example of a ballot measure that would have been fantastic for Arizona protest voters to acknowledge was Proposition 139, which would create a state-level constitutional right to abortion. Like I said before, most Americans are actually pro-choice to some extent, so this measure did go through. However, Arizona's other questions probably should have caused leftist eyebrows to raise, I should think. But as a matter of fact, 11 states had ballot propositions related to the right to an abortion, 3 of which failed. So again, I ask, were we voting for these things, or did the protest extend beyond just the presidential candidates? Did we fuck up and not check what was going on a state level, perhaps? All of this to say, be cognizant that there is much more at stake than just the president. That level of short-sightedness and indecisiveness will be the end of us all. Each section of this video somewhat spoke to the overall general perceptions of the online left. I don't believe the reputation of the online left is nearly as poisonous or as cancerous as some of the online right thinks, nor do I believe the left intentionally spreads disinformation. However, the online left can be prone to half-truths and misinformation due to the desire to oversimplify and catch up with the online right's intensity. An example I'll reference here are the new company boycott lists going around, where people are saying they are going to boycott any and all businesses that donated to Trump. However, several companies on these lists donated to both Harris and Trump, or have never donated to Trump at all. The most popular example of this is more than likely Sephora, which leads to the question of how is this research being conducted for this list? Regardless, misinformation aside, information having political spins, I don't really see as a non-starter per se. It's something I personally expect from any and all political media. We are talking about politics, not objective fact or universal truth. Political discourse innately requires a spin or an angle because the discourse is trying to persuade you. It is what it is. I want to use the creator Noah Sampson as an example here, not because what he's doing is wrong. I actually find him quite interesting and effective in other ways that I would later discuss in a different video, maybe. Recently, he's been posting non-stop about Palestine. His sourcing utilizes a mixture of Instagram postings, news articles and journals, and mainstream coverage. He is not completing thorough analysis of the coverage, nor is he playing a two-siders argument, and no one should really expect him to, because that really isn't the intent. Noah is pushing this coverage to his audience, an audience that is more than likely at least vaguely aware of the happenings in Palestine, but maybe not intimately aware. There is an assumption that what Noah is doing is solely to raise awareness, something we'll discuss in a moment. But what is also happening, whether he intended to or not, he is radicalizing people. This term is used very neutrally as a way to describe vocal outrage. Noah is not attempting to convince his audience why they should be pro-Palestine. He doesn't really need to, because they probably already are. He is using the political echo chamber he's built by establishing a platform of like-minded individuals to push them further left. How many times could you stand to see innocent children and people dying and suffering without becoming desperate to support those involved? How many culturally significant artifacts, buildings, schools, mosques, churches can you watch be destroyed in an attempt to eradicate an entire ethnic group? Well, unless you're Destiny,
there's just nothing about this is consistent with a genocide, other than a few irresponsible statements that people have made for sure. But I don't think that the evidence is there. I don't think the evidence for it is strong. And I think it takes away from the more important conversation of how do we feel about the justifications for the war right now, and what can we do to bring the conflict to an end?
Probably not many times, especially when it is coupled with footage of Israeli Zionist people who are justifying the slaughter. I believe actions like Noah speak to both the central group behavior and reputation of the online left. In reviewing his videos, we can assume that the online left, as a majority, probably don't know as much as they think they do about the ongoing war, given the amount of "I didn't knows" in his comment section. And when they see it and realize that this is what people are attempting to defend, they will stay left, at least when it comes to this one issue, because of the intense emotional response. We can also assume the online left is still obsessed with the idea of raising awareness without organization, as well as the ongoing desire for visibility. This isn't a slight at Noah in any way. I'm more so referring again to his comment section. Thank you for continuously putting a spotlight on Palestinians. Thanks, Noah. Good job on covering this. Thanks for the educational content. The praise and thanks Noah and other creators who post similar content goes on and on and on. And it needs to stop. Why are we thanking a leftist, a politically involved leftist, for being a leftist, for posting content on their politicized platform about one of the biggest focuses of the left? Why is the bar so low, and why are we not picking it up off the dirty floor? People, the left, thank others when they are not shit human beings, when their favorite celebrities aren't on Diddy's party list, when they post a heavily demanded donation link, when they turn out to be not racist or not bigots. White leftists thank Black creators for explaining very baseline, very simplistic deconstructions of racial dynamics. Is it because your favorite creator has done the work for you and all you had to do was sit and watch? Because you need to be seen doing the work? I find that people, especially in tumultuous situations, feel the need to not do the work, but to be seen doing the work. The aesthetic of activism, after all, is so much more intoxicating than actual activism. For many people, the planning stages of anything are the most exciting. The one piece of advice that I believe holds true from fitness instructors is start right now, don't plan for tomorrow. There's a documented behavioral pattern that creates a link between a person's desire to plan and the feeling of accomplishment. Once the plan is created, people tend to feel accomplished and therefore rarely follow up with doing the actual thing they were planning for. Similarly, when they talk about planning things with other people, that same feeling of accomplishment arises. Noah, Andrewism, Philosophy Tube, H. Bomber Guy, they are literally handing you the information. They have sourced it. They have applied their leftist spin. Now, what are we doing with it? I bet you a bag of chips the answer is nothing. I've said it before and I will continue to say it. These creators are nothing but introductions. They are introductions to left-leaning thoughts and analysis structures. The rest is up to you. It cannot start and end with them, and I fear that it is. Do you remember when I mentioned earlier, for the 12th time, that young adults are more likely to bend their opinions and change their minds if someone close to them challenges them. Well, according to a Pew Research Center survey conducted earlier this year, participants in the age range 18 to 34, while more critical of Israel's actions than the older brackets and much less supportive of the U.S. providing military aid to Israel, they are also somewhat less in favor of the U.S. providing humanitarian aid to Gaza, or playing a major diplomatic role in resolving the conflict. Additionally, while 36% of 18 to 29 age range believe Biden is providing too much support to Israel, 41% are unsure. Online leftists have an opportunity here to take what they're being made privy to online, offline, into their lives, where they can have conversations within their own communities to either change minds or offer new perspectives. When are we going to finally understand that awareness is not enough? That awareness without goals and parameters is only inaction. Information plus platform and the ability to reach plus inaction equals a poor reputation. A reputation that is comprised mostly of virtue signaling, aesthetics, and a lack of urgency. I believe the internet, social media, has the ability to serve as a powerful tool. If you turn around and look at the right-wing conservatives, Trumpers, you can see that. But most of them have something a lot on the left do not. Money. That's why I didn't lead with constant comparisons to the online right, because it's not very fair. I like to compare the online left instead to other left-wing movements in similar online spaces. The online left has to learn how to create actual political stances, not just narratives or evaluation structures. They have to learn how to scale, to decenter individual morality and make hard decisions. Politics is not just about you and your morality, after all. It's about the collective. They need to develop actionable plans and actually show a true interest in being politically involved, to have the true desire to not only seek power, but demand it. Unless we're ready to admit that content is just content, and we're all just here yapping. The online left can be something that lends a hand in turning the tides in American politics, but I believe it needs to be better defined, easier to pinpoint, and to understand. In order for others to take the online left seriously, you have to learn how to take yourself seriously. It can be more than just content if you allow it to be. It can be more than the hyperfixation on a small handful of creators who regularly act apolitical on their platforms. As we move into another Trump presidency, as one of the most powerful countries in the world shift further and further into fascism, because apparently that's what the majority of those who care to vote want, the online left's responsibility in people's minds will continue to grow. More people will begin to understand that while Trump's win was a general loss to everyone remotely left-leaning, Harris's loss is not unequivocally our loss, because what the hell were the Democrats really gonna do anyway? Because of that, people will begin to seek alternative thoughts, alternative online chambers. Now, will these people run into the online left, renewed, reinvigorated, and ready to argue? Or will they find me, though admittingly left-leaning and progressive, a politically and philosophically nihilistic asshole? Your choice.